Hi there. Welcome to Chapter 2. We're going to look at job analysis and work design. So our agenda for today, we're going to talk about job analysis as it relates to human resources management. We're going to walk through 4 current approaches to job analysis. We're going to take a look at the sections that are included in a job description. We're going to look at the NOC and the Job Bank of Canada. Then we're going to look at some elements of job design and the 3 theories related to that. And we're going to conclude the chapter by taking a look at teamwork at work. And finally, we'll go through some Chapter 2 review questions. So what is a job? A job is a group of related activities and duties. It's important to remember that not all jobs are paid. You may have had some paid and or some unpaid jobs in your career so far. So what is job analysis? Job analysis is the process of obtaining information about a job by looking at all of the duties, tasks, and activities, basically all of the requirements of a job. When we're doing job analysis, we should also take a look at, for instance, the tools that are needed to do a job, the environment and times when we're doing a job, with whom the job is done, and the outcome or performance level. And we're going to walk through a couple of examples of this together. So let's take a look at a job analysis example for an electrician. If you're familiar with an electrician, if I'm doing their job analysis, I'm going to look at, for instance, what kind of tools are needed if I'm an electrician. So even if you're not familiar with what an electrician does, you could probably guess that they probably need to have regular tools, things for wiring a house, for instance. So maybe like a screwdriver and a hammer, maybe an electrical meter. We'd also take a look at the environment and the times at when this is done. So if I'm an electrician, I may, if I'm wiring houses, for instance, need to work in an environment that requires me to be outside, for instance, at times if I'm wiring outdoor lighting. And maybe it may have to work different times, like Saturdays, for instance, if a job needs to get done. With whom does it need to be done? So I would look at things like I would probably have to work with other contractors like plumbers, drywallers, things like that. So with whom do I need to be working? And last but not least, if I'm doing a job analysis for an electrician, I would take a look at the outcome or performance level that they should be achieving. So we wouldn't want the job to be half wired. We'd need it to be completely wired and to be according to safety regulations as well. So the performance level would be that it's complete and that it meets all Canadian safety guidelines. That's just one quick example. Let's look at you. If I was to analyze your job as a college student, now not a job that you would take as a college student, but what you're actually doing as a college student. Think for a second about the kind of tools that you need to be a college student. Things like a laptop, for instance, or the ability to listen to this PowerPoint, so something with speakers. The environment and times at which you work. So you probably work more than 8 hours a day doing your job as a college student. And you probably have to be available between 8 a.m. in the morning for some classes to up to 8 p.m. at night. So those are somewhat irregular times that we would say that we would want to note as part of your job analysis. Think about for a second with whom you need to work. Well, you need to work with professors, of course, but you need to work with each other. There's a lot of group activities that you do in class, and you also have to work with administrative staff, like financial aid officers or the registrar's office, for instance. And last but not least, if I think about the outcome or the performance level that you have to achieve, well, you want to do more than just pass your courses. So you're looking for a performance level of achieving excellence in certain areas, for instance, specifically areas around your program of study. So if you're in finance, for instance, you want to make sure that you're achieving significantly high marks in those courses, so your performance level is very high. Maybe in some of your other courses, the outcome is something that you would just be satisfied with a satisfactory mark, for instance. So again, just as a brief example, thinking about job analysis, we would look at all of these factors to take note of them as we look at your job as a college student. So when do we analyze jobs? Well, the number one reason and the number one time that we do this is when we're writing or updating a job description. But we also look at them when within an organization when a vacancy occurs. So when someone is leaving a job, for instance, it's a great opportunity to sit down and talk to that person about their job and all of the things that are involved with it. We also have to analyze jobs when we're creating new positions within an organization. It's an opportunity for us to put all of the requirements in place that we need. And last but not least, when we're introducing large workplace changes, such as new technology, things that will impact many jobs, that's a great time for us to do job analysis. You can imagine, for instance, if you worked in a warehouse prior to the implementation of computers. When computers were implemented into warehouses, that was an opportunity for us to do job analysis. We moved from taking inventory via paper to using a computer to do inventory. So jobs changed dramatically, and that's an opportunity for us to take a look and analyze that job and see how it's changed. So my first question for you is, why do you think that job analysis is called the cornerstone of human resources management? To answer that question, you have to think about all of the things that we learn through job analysis. We learn about all of the different job requirements, and those job requirements impact a lot of different areas of human resources management. So for instance, strategic planning that we've talked about prior to this chapter, strategic planning really is all about understanding who we have in an organization and where we're going and where we want to be. So in order to do that, we have to understand the jobs that we have, and that's job analysis. For recruiting people, we need to have done a complete and thorough job analysis and have a really solid job description in order to make sure that we're recruiting the right people and selecting the right people for jobs. It also helps us tremendously when it comes to training and development. We're able to train people on the things that we need to be trained on, and we use the job description to help us guide the training and development program. Also for performance appraisals. When annually or biannually you're sitting down with your boss and talking about your performance, it's important that you have a solid job description so that you can really point to where do I need to improve and what tasks do I do right now that perhaps need to be reevaluated. The performance appraisal piece is also tied right into compensation management. So how much are you being paid? The more you do, obviously, the more you should be paid. So a complete and thorough job analysis that really includes all of the information that you do, all of the tasks, the duties and responsibilities that's in your job description is going to help tie directly to your compensation management. And last but not least, legal compliance. I'm going to talk about a few examples later on, but we need to make sure that everything you're doing complies with the law. And as we've talked about earlier in this course, we've got both our common law that we need to be considered as well as our statutory legislation. So anything that's in your job description has to make sure that it complies with the law. So there are some traditional methods that we used to use in HR for gathering information about job analysis. For instance, we used to do interviews with people where I would just talk to you about your job, ask you questions about what you did, and then go away and try to prepare a job description. But you can imagine that if I'm interviewing you, I'm probably going to forget to ask you a lot of things, and you may forget to share pieces of information with me. So that method we found that there were a lot of mistakes made, and a lot of time was wasted going back and forth between the HR person doing the job analysis and the person doing the job. So then we came up with a more advanced method of just providing a questionnaire to you as the job holder and asking you to complete it to tell us more about your job. Again, though, this created a lot of back and forth. If we missed questions on the questionnaire, for instance, if you ever tried to prepare a survey, often you get information back and it just leads to more questions. So it didn't really give the HR person doing the job analysis enough information to put together an accurate job description. So a third way that we used to traditionally do job analysis was through observation. So taking a clipboard, going and standing and watching someone do their job. I can share from my own experience with you. When I started in HR, this is how I did job analysis, was just through observation, sitting down with people, telling them to pretend I wasn't there and ask them to just go about their day. Well, You can imagine with someone sitting next to you who's a stranger to you, or even someone that you know a little bit, and asking you just to carry on with your regular day, it isn't the best way to really capture everything that you do. First of all, in that hour or two that I'm sitting with you, I'm not going to see everything that you encounter. The other thing is you may be very nervous with me sitting there, so you may actually not perform as well as you normally do, or maybe you are overachieving and maybe overperforming or overacting in what you normally do. So observation, we found, again, didn't give us enough data to be able to put together a proper job description. So last but not least, us being brilliant people in HR, and I'm being sarcastic here, we came up with an idea of putting a diary in place and asking you just to complete the diary as a job holder. Well, again, this traditional method of job analysis we found didn't work very well because by putting the onus on you and asking you every, let's say, 15 minutes to complete a diary of what you've just been working on, many people got frustrated with this. Really, this was asking you to give us all of the details. And so by the end of the time of using a diary over a few days, a week, or a month, again, we found that the information that we got was vague and didn't really help us complete a proper job description. So these traditional methods have been somewhat scrapped and replaced with more contemporary methods of putting together a job analysis. So there are four different approaches today to job analysis. These are in your textbook, page 47 to 49 in chapter 2. And what I would ask you to do is to take a few minutes before you continue to go into your textbook, take a look at these four different methods, and just take note of how the information is collected and an advantage and a disadvantage for each one of these methods before you continue. So feel free to hit pause on me, jump into your textbook and take a look at these. And then I will go through them just briefly from a high level, just highlighting some of the different ways that we do job analysis today. So hopefully you've taken a look at your textbook and you've seen that the first way that companies do job analysis today is through something called the PAQ, Position Analysis Questionnaire. The PAQ is where we're giving people a list of 194 questions. This is kind of a checklist approach, and it's a very generic questionnaire that we're giving. So companies can actually buy the PAQ and give this out. And we use a 5-point scale to take a look at the degree to which these tasks and job elements are performed. I'm going to show you an example in just a second. One of the advantages to this is we get lots of data. From an HR perspective, we get a huge amount of data because it is 194 questions. And so we're able to group this together based on common job characteristics, and it helps us put together the job description. You can imagine, if you think critically about this, what a disadvantage to this would be it's 194 questions. If you have ever completed a survey of even 100 questions, well, you get pretty bored by the time you get to 100, much less 194. So a disadvantage could be that the job holder may not take this seriously. Also, it's somewhat subjective too. Something that I believe that I do that's very important to my job, someone else doing the same job may feel is not quite as important. So a disadvantage could be that an HR person may get a lot of data, but it may be somewhat subjective. So what they might get, they may still have lots of questions about it. So here's an example of a piece of the PAQ, the Position Analysis Questionnaire. So as you can see here, this is a section about information input, and the questions are related to the sources of job information. You'll notice in the top right-hand corner, this is the scale that someone is filling in. So from NA, which means does not apply, to 1, which means nominal or very infrequently, 2, occasionally, 3, moderately, 4, considerably, or 5, very substantially. They're then going through this section by section saying, for instance, in this case, visual sources of job information. How much do I use written materials, books, reports, office notes, articles, job instructions, signs, etc.? This person has indicated 4, considerably. Or if you look at the bottom, question number 5 is visual displays. So how often do they use dials, gauges, signal lights, radar scopes, speedometers, I don't even know what those are, and clocks. And they've said 2 occasionally. Wow, it's pretty dry, right? So you can imagine 194 of these questions. As a job holder, you're going to go through each one of these and rank them. So a second new method that we use is something called the critical incident method. Critical incident method really identifies important job duties and responsibilities that lead to job success. So this is collected by interviewing both the employee and the manager, and or by asking the job holder to self-report. And what we're looking for them to report on is what is done, how it's performed, and the tools and equipment that they use. This method really focuses on employee behavior that's critical to job success and is very observable. So hopefully you have a bit of understanding here to be able to think about what would be an advantage to this type of method and what would be a disadvantage to the critical incident method. A third new way of looking at job analysis is through the task inventory analysis. This is a job-oriented type of job analysis where we get a very structured job questionnaire that we give out. Again, we give this to the job holder or manager, and we ask them to compile a list of tasks. We then take that list of tasks and we put it into a survey form that is then given out to people doing the job to do. It's somewhat similar to the pack, and that the information is collected via a questionnaire, but it is unique and that the questionnaire is made by us. So we tailor make it specific to an organization or to a group of jobs. So again, think critically about this from what you know. What would be an advantage to this and what would be a disadvantage? The last type of job analysis is a competency-based analysis. And this is where we're really looking at specific competencies related to a role. We look at a job profile and we take a look at all of the responsibilities and activities that the worker completes. And what are the best competencies for the people doing the job? Some common competencies that we look at are things like communication skills, problem-solving skills, decision-making skills, conflict resolution skills. And the objective of this type of analysis is to find key competencies for organizational success. We gather this data through some focus groups, surveys, and or interviews with managers and job holders. Again, make sure you can identify an advantage and a disadvantage of this type of job analysis. So you've heard a lot now. The position analysis questionnaire, the critical incident method, the task inventory analysis, and the competency-based analysis. These are all the current ways that we do job analysis. What I would expect you to know is just some key points and one advantage and one disadvantage of each. So thinking critically about each one. And remember that the purpose of job analysis, the main purpose, is to prepare a job description. So what would be an advantage to using one of these methods over another? Talk about job descriptions. Have you ever had a job description? And if you haven't, what problems are created when you don't have one, or if you have one that's incorrect? So think about your own experience for a second. Have you had a job where when you first started at the job, you were provided with a written job description? If it was not accurate, did it create some problems for you? Or what about a job where you didn't have a job description? What problems or issues may come up if you're not sure what your job is? We've talked about that you need to do job analysis in order to prepare an accurate job description that's going to have your job specifications. So what is a job description? It is a statement of the task, duties, and responsibilities of a job to be performed. It contains job specifications, which are the knowledge, the skills, and the abilities of the person who is performing the job. It's important to note here, when I'm talking about a job description, it's very different than a job posting. A job posting is an external document, something that you'd see on Monster, for instance, or in the job bank that we're going to talk about in a few minutes. An external posting, the audience of that is someone who is looking for a job, whereas a job description is someone who is doing the job, someone who already has the job. So it's a completely different audience and purpose, and it's much more detailed in its scope, which is why it contains the job specifications, the knowledge, skills, and abilities of the person who is performing the job. So there are 5 sections in a job description. This is on page 51 of your textbook. If you'd like to follow along, that would be fantastic. This is related directly to the Chapter 2 assignment that you're going to be doing. Regardless of the assignment that you choose, you're going to be putting together a job description. So it's important that you understand these 5 sections because this is your assignment, part 1 for the Chapter 2. So the first section is the job identification section. This is at the very top of the page, and this really distinguishes this job from all other jobs in the company. It has the job title, the department where this person or this job works, the job analyst, who is you, the person who's preparing the job description, with the date, and who this position reports to. And we say in title, not the person's name. You're probably wondering why we don't just put the person's name there. So for instance, if this person reports to the vice president, why don't we list the vice president's name? Well, the answer to that is that we don't want to have to update the job description every time that person changes, which is why we just list the title, the department, and the person in terms of the title of who it reports to and not the name. The second section after job identification is something called the job statement. This is the reason why this job exists. This is a very short paragraph, a couple of sentences that summarizes the overall purpose and the mission of the job. It provides the rationale for why the job exists and how it contributes to the organization. These 2 first sections are critical. If I'm looking at job descriptions for my organization, I should be able to take a look at just the job ID section and the job statement and stop reading there unless I'm the job holder. Just by looking at those 2 sections, I'm able to see what this job is, who it reports to, when the last time we looked at it is, and this job statement tells me the reason for being. Why do we have this job in our organization? Why is it important? The next section, this is the biggest part of the job description. Talks about the essential functions section, the job duties, and this is the responsibilities and the results, the level of which things are to be accomplished. So we talk about essential duties and responsibilities of the position, written as clearly as possible. We sometimes organize these into what's called common purpose groups or categories of work. The main idea here, though, is we start each bullet point, and this is all done in bullet points, with an action verb. And each point is either a task, a duty, or a responsibility of this particular position. So some examples here. This would be what we would call a common purpose group, in that all of these functions fall under recruitment services, which is part of a job. So under recruitment services, which is the common purpose group or the category of this work, this person posts all job vacancies on the company's career website. They ensure that postings match job description. They arrange for advertising of vacancies. They assist and answer questions and inquiries, and they schedule interviews. You notice that the start of each bullet point is an action because you are doing the job. So that is critical. And it's also all, you'll notice, present tense because the person is currently doing the job. So they're not in past tense, it's present tense. The next section is what's called the job specification section. So these are the skills required and the physical demands of the job. And this is where we talk about the knowledge, skills, and abilities, sometimes referred to as KSOs or KSAOs, knowledge, skills, abilities, and others, required for this position. So this can also be educational requirements or special training or certifications required. Here are some examples. Something like if you're working in finance, Some of the job specifications might list things like a college diploma in accounting required, considerable knowledge of MS Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, ability to work in a fast-paced environment with little supervision, excellent communication, written and verbal required, knowledge of SAP as it relates to finance and accounting. So these would be specific knowledge, skills, and abilities required, not general, but something for this position that we say this person needs to have these things in order to complete this job. The next section, this is not in your textbook, but this is an important section to include in job descriptions, and it is part of your Chapter 2 assignment. To include a section called Working Conditions. I say this is important because we want to call these out separate than some of the other areas we've talked about. So these are physical and environmental conditions of this position. Now these wouldn't be regular conditions. So if I'm just working in an office, in a regular office with regular 9 to 5 type of job, then really my working conditions would just be standard working conditions. In here, though, we want to put anything that's above and beyond those standard conditions. So for instance, if my job requires some physicality to it, so things like heavy lifting or high temperatures or low temperatures. So if I'm working in the Arctic and I have to be outside, that's not a normal physical working condition to be in. Or something that requires a lot of fumes or hazards that I have to work with. We'd consider those to be specific physical working conditions that we'd want to list because those are tied directly to this job. I also say things like environmental conditions. So think about if I've got to work in a very dusty environment or a tight space at heights, for instance, that would be an environmental condition of a specific job. Other things to note here would be things like mental conditions, things like high stress environments, working under really tight deadlines for a lot of time. Those would be very tight mental conditions that I would want to take note of because they are related directly, again, to this job. We would also want to work or put in here if there's any business travel required. So generally how often and for what type of duration. So is this a job that requires people to travel every week, every month, and for how long when they go? We would also take note of any hours that are, again, not typical. So the regular, you would assume 8 to 4, 9 to 5, 10 to 6 hours that we'd have in a day. Those you don't need to take note of. But if this job requires someone to work long days or a lot of extra hours, those would be specific working conditions we would list. So if you think, for instance, if working in finance, if you have to work long hours at month end, for instance, you would want to take note of that here. And last but not least, any other conditions that are very unique to this position. So if this position allows someone to work from home, which we call telecommuting, if this is a position that requires job sharing or enables job sharing, or something like flex time, we would put that in here. So a couple of examples I've included. This position requires working under tight timelines and deadlines on a regular basis, some travel required on a monthly basis, and some overnight travel required. On occasion, hours in excess of 45 hours a week are necessary to complete job responsibilities. So again, these are above and beyond normal conditions. We would list these in the working conditions section. So now that we've reviewed the elements of the different sections in a job description, you're probably wondering why some companies don't have job descriptions. I mean, it's not the law. Companies do not have to give you a job description. So we often find that small companies or startup companies do not typically provide job descriptions for employees. Can you think for a second of some advantages for a business to not provide you with a job description? There can be some problems with providing job descriptions. For instance, if they are poorly written or somewhat vague, they don't provide a lot of guidance to you as a job holder. The second thing is, as you know, our workplace is changing very rapidly. And sometimes, if they are written very generically, they don't reflect changing job duties, or perhaps our job duties change so rapidly that once we provide a job description, it becomes out of date very quickly. The third thing is they can violate the law by containing specifications not related to job success. So let me give you an extreme example. There was a case where an airline was taken to court by having a job description that was extremely out of date. That job description contained elements that stated that an airline stewardess needed to be female, needed to be of a certain height, and needed to be below a certain weight. Well, obviously, those are things today that we would say do not relate to job success. We do not have to have female stewardesses. They don't have to be a certain height, and they don't have to be under a certain weight. But in that extreme case, the airline, the violation was that those things were embedded in their job description. So it's important that companies make sure that they are reviewing job descriptions to make sure that they don't contain anything that's not related to job success going forward or as the law changes. The fourth thing is they can limit the scope of activities of the job holder, which some organizations feel may reduce their ability to be flexible. But I would say probably the biggest problem with job descriptions from an organizational perspective is they take time and effort to complete. And remember, time and effort is time and money. So for large organizations, if you think about something like OPG or TD Bank or any other large organization like CP Rail, these organizations have job descriptions, but they also have teams of people, and their full-time job is to review the job descriptions to make sure that they're up to date. So that takes considerable time, effort, and money to keep them up to date. The next thing we're going to take a look at is something called the National Occupational Classification, known as the NOC, and the Job Bank of Canada. This is something that the federal government compiles, and it's data on jobs across the country. It has over 25,000 jobs, and it is linked to the Job Bank of Canada, which lists available jobs across the country. If you've ever wondered how much money you're going to make in your career, where are the jobs for your profession, what jobs are currently available, this is a fantastic resource that is put together by the government and kept up to date. It's used not only for posting jobs, but for analyzing and forecasting needs and trends and looking at job trends going forward. I'm just going to walk you through some of the screenshots that I've taken of this job bank, and then I'm going to have you dive in there and take a look around. So once you go to this www.jobbank.gc.ca/trend-analysis, when you scroll down, you'll see that there's something called the new tool. It's called Visualize Labor Market Information. I want you to click there and say, try the new tool. You'll notice then, once you click in the new tool, it has Explore Labor Market Information. And to your right, it has the Occupation, Job Title, or NOC code. It also has a geographical area. So you could start typing in here any type of occupation. I started typing in finance. And as soon as I started typing in finance, it brought up a list of jobs for me, and I chose finance and administrative director as an example. The next thing I went down was to the geographical area, and I started typing in Toronto, and it brought up again a drop down for me of saying Toronto, Toronto Islands, Toronto Gore Rural Estate, or just Toronto. So you select your city. And let me just caution you here, or note for you, you cannot break this tool. So you're free to play around with it, and it is a free tool. The next thing you're going to bring up here is it brings up the 3-year outlook based on different regions for this job. So you'll notice here that what I've brought up is it's got 1 star, and it's also got the wages here in terms of the low, the median, and the high. We're going to keep going with this. So you'll see here it's got the 3-year outlook, and it's got it by province. So the outlook for this job in BC is pretty good, 2 out of 3 stars. In New Brunswick, 2 out of 3 stars, but I would not apply for this job in PEI where there are no stars, for instance. In Quebec, it's only got 1 star. It says that the median range in the economic region of Toronto for this job is $34.04 per hour. The next piece is, now that you know sort of what the outlook is and what the median range is, if we go to the job posting section, you'll see the numbers here next to this. And this may change based on the time that you're looking at this versus the time that I was looking at this. But it's got here the economic region with the highest job post counts from the job bank. In the Toronto region, that number 35, that's the number of job postings in the Toronto region. There are 10 in Ottawa, 4 in the Northeast region, and 4 in the London region. You can now view this job posting a couple different ways. You can click on that number 35, let's say, on the Toronto region, and it'll bring up a list. Or you can take a look at the map, and it'll actually show you where this is, and then click on View this posting on jobbank.gc.ca. I've included a link here for you, and it's also included under the Chapter 2 DC Connect for our chapter. So this relates directly to the Chapter 2 assignment. In the Chapter 2 assignment, you're going to have a choice of preparing a job description for either you as a college student or by taking a look at one of these job postings and then using the job posting, create a job description. I'll give you a hint. The job posting will not have all of the information that you need for a job description, so you'll need to be somewhat creative. You'll need to really walk through the 5 sections included in the job description that we've walked through today as part of this PowerPoint and as part of your textbook, and make sure that you fill in all of the missing information. For example, you may find a job posting and it doesn't say who this position reports to, but you'll have to think creatively and think if, for instance, it's a customer service position, it would most likely report into, let's say, a customer service manager. Or you may find a job that has lots of information, but it doesn't specifically talk about working conditions. You'll have to think about what do you know about this type of job to be able to include that section in the job description. So far, we've been spending a lot of time talking about job analysis. We've talked about the 4 approaches to job analysis, and we've walked through job descriptions. We are now ready to tackle job design, which is probably one of the most interesting areas when we're looking at job analysis. So what is job design? Well, the official definition is it improves jobs by looking at technological and human considerations to enhance organizational efficiency and employee job satisfaction. So how does that differ from job analysis, you might be thinking? Well, remember, job analysis is the study of jobs currently performed by employees to develop job descriptions, job duties, and job requirements, what we just finished talking about. Whereas job design is structuring jobs to improve organizational efficiency and employee job satisfaction. Got it? Okay. A few things to remember. If we're looking at workflow analysis, we're looking at how the work in the organization should be divided up into jobs. Job analysis is looking at the jobs as they are and determining the tasks, duties, responsibilities, and the knowledge, skills, and abilities of the people doing the job. Job design is an outcrop of job analysis where we make sure that jobs are designed in a way that meet the needs of workers and the organizations. Basically, the fundamental underlying principle of job design is that by making people happier, they will also work harder for the organization. So the focus of job design then is focusing on behaviors that improve efficiency in the workplace and make us happier. So it's really twofold: how to make us more efficient and how to make sure that we're happier doing the jobs that we're doing. There's 4 different bases when we're talking about job design. So we're looking first of all at organizational objectives for the job. So those are the tasks, the duties, and the responsibilities to be performed. So how do we make those more effective and also make us happier? We also look at behavior concerns related to the different talents, abilities, and skills of our employees. The final 2 that we'll look at briefly are industrial engineering concerns and ergonomic considerations. So think about a job that you had that you really enjoyed. What about it specifically did you enjoy? So how do we think about improving efficiency and making people happier? Let's take a look at three organizational behavior models of job design. So if you're wondering where we're going with this, there's three different models that talk about how to improve job efficiency and make people happier. And these are organizational behavior models that have taken a look at this and studied this. So the first one we think about, right, is we're going to look at three different job design theories. The first one is called the job enrichment model. The second one is the job characteristics model. And the third one is the employee empowerment model. Now, don't get too lost here. What we're trying to take a look at is three different theories on how to improve job satisfaction and productivity. And these three different theories have some common elements that I'm going to point out as we go through this. Some common job characteristics that help improve satisfaction and productivity. So the first model that I want to touch upon is called the job enrichment model by a gentleman named Hertzberg. He said to improve employee efficiency and make them happier, the first thing we need to do is to increase the level of difficulty and responsibility within the job. That may sound counterintuitive. You might say, wait a second, by making my job more difficult and giving me more responsibility, I'm going to be happier? And Hertzberg would say, yes. By looking at the study of people doing jobs, he found that if we don't start to slowly increase the level of difficulty and give people more responsibility, they become very bored in their jobs, and their productivity and happiness actually decreases. So again, think about jobs that you've had in the past. Once you master a certain level of doing a job, if your boss or supervisor doesn't actually give you things that are a little more challenging or more responsibility, you may find that your motivation starts to decrease. And Hertzberg would be right. The second thing he said we need to do is we need to give employees more authority and control over their work outcomes. So again, them being able to see what they're doing and having more control over what they're doing will make them more engaged. The third thing he said is we have to provide individual job performance feedback. And here he was talking about really that not only should we get feedback from our bosses and supervisors, but we should be able to see that when we do a job that it's done properly. So some feedback that we can actually see and perhaps as a supervisor telling us how we're doing in our job. The fourth thing he said, we have to add new tasks that require training and growth. And this is kind of like the first one, where we're increasing the level of difficulty, but also using some skills and growing. And last but not least, assign specific tasks where we can use our particular competencies or skills. The idea behind this model then is that we play to our strengths. So things that we do very well, we should continue to use those skills and increase the level of difficulty using those skills. The second model that we're going to look at is by Hackman and Oldham, and they talked about the job characteristics model. And you're going to start to see some themes here when we're talking about designing jobs to motivate employees. So in this model, they said that there are certain job characteristics, things like skill variety, task identity. And what they mean by that is that I can identify what I do and I can understand the significance of that. So task identity and task significance, understanding how my job relates to the whole success of the organization. The following two things are autonomy. So autonomy means having control over my own environment. And last but not least, feedback. You're probably hearing some similarity to the one we just talked about, and you'd be correct. So Hackman and Oldham said these job characteristics lead to the psychological states where we feel that there's meaningfulness in the work that we're performing, we're responsible for our work outcomes, and we know the results of the work that's being performed. Those psychological states create job outcomes where we have improved work performance, we have more internal motivation and satisfaction, and overall lower absenteeism and turnover within the organization. So let me just put these side by side for you. If you look at the job enrichment model by Herzberg versus the job characteristics model by Hackman and Oldham, you'll see some, I've highlighted here, some similarities. So in the job enrichment model, number 2 says give employees more authority and control over work outcomes. Well, in the job characteristics model, that's what we're calling autonomy. The job enrichment model number 3 says provide individual job performance and feedback, and you notice the job characteristics model also says feedback. The number 4, adding new tasks that require training and growth. And also number 1, increasing the level of difficulty and responsibility, ties into the job characteristics model talking about skill variety, task identity, and somewhat to the task significance. So even though these are 2 different models of looking at job design, you're seeing some similarities here. I want to just talk just for a second about examples of high and low job characteristics. So just to give you a clear understanding of when we're talking about skill variety, an example here. If I'm looking for a job that has high variety, we say the owner-operator of a garage who does electrical repair, rebuilds engines, does body work, and interacts with customers, that's a high variety of skills. Versus a low variety would be a body shop worker who spray paints 8 hours a day. So we want to have high variety. That's going to keep us happier. Task identity, if we've got high task identity, the example is a cabinet maker who designs a piece of furniture. With that, they select the wood, they build the object, and they finish it to perfection. A low identity would be a worker in a furniture factory who operates a lathe to make table legs. So they're doing the same thing day in, day out. For task significance, someone who has high task significance would be nursing the sick in a hospital intensive care unit. Right? They understand that what they're doing is very important. Someone else who works in the hospital might have low significance if they're sweeping the hospital floor and they don't see why or how this job is important to the overall whole. Autonomy. High autonomy is a telephone installer who schedules his or her own work day and decides the best techniques for a particular installation. Or if you think about a customer service rep who's able to troubleshoot based on the customer that comes in and troubleshoot their particular problem. A low autonomy would be a telephone operator who must handle calls as they come according to a routine, highly specialized procedure. And in my example again, a customer service rep who's not able to troubleshoot but has to double check the solution in a binder or with a manager before they're able to troubleshoot a problem. For feedback, a job that has high feedback, if you think about an electronics factory worker who assembles a radio and then tests it to determine if it operates properly, versus low feedback, someone who assembles a radio and then routes it to a quality control inspector who tests and adjusts it. So feedback doesn't always have to mean feedback from your supervisor in terms of great job, but it could mean feedback in terms of understanding that what I do and seeing it to the very end result. So based on what we just talked about, could you identify factors which would improve both organizational efficiency and job satisfaction based on the theories that we just reviewed? The final job design theory that we want to talk about is something called employee empowerment. This has definitely been a thread in the first 2 theories that we've looked at, but here what we're talking about is giving employees the power to initiate change, thereby encouraging them to take charge of what they do. This is a much less structured method than the 2 that we've looked at, job enrichment or job characteristics model. But in this, employees are empowered to manage their own work through the process of inclusion. An employee has more control and decision-making capability overall. So in this model, we're really saying, how can we empower employees so that they have the ability to make more decisions and take more control of their day and of their work, which therefore will make them happier and more productive. We're really talking about working in a perfect world where everyone would embrace job design and job redesign. But remember, we do not live in a perfect world. So you would think that everyone would want to have their job redesigned to include elements to make them happier and more productive. But it's important to note that employees may resist a job redesign unless they have the skills and abilities to perform more complex jobs. Because as we've talked about, all of these involve giving you a little bit more responsibility, maybe stretching your skills a little bit more. So we have to assume that people have those skills in order to be stretched. And also, the employee has to have the psychological desire to want more autonomy, more variety, more responsibility, and the challenge of an enriched jobs. Again, we're assuming that everybody is the same and that everybody is looking for those things. But you may know people, you may think yourself, you've had jobs where you just want to come in and do your job and you're not looking for additional responsibility or variety in your job. Some of that may depend on where you're at in terms of your career and your career trajectory and where you want to go. There's a couple other things I want to touch upon, and these are what we call, we're looking at job design, addressing behavioral concerns. So these are not tied to the models that we've talked about, although they can somewhat talk about autonomy when it comes to flexible work schedules. There's a couple things I want to talk about when we're talking about work schedules that you may have heard about before. So these would be outcrops of job design. So things that may give people more autonomy. Depending on the type of organization, you may be able to implement these types of things. The first one is the compressed work week. Sometimes we call this the 4-10. This is where we shorten the number of days in the work week by lengthening the number of hours that you work. So in this case, the typical compressed work week is working 4 10-hour days, which is why we call it the 4-10. And then you have either a Friday or a Monday off every week. So you get a long weekend every weekend. That's different than flex time, where flex time you may have heard of. This is where the employee sets their start time and finish time. And you may have core hours of the business. So for instance, your business may be open between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. And you may have flex time where someone can decide that they want to work 10 to 6, for instance, or 11 to 7, or noon to 8. As long as those core hours are fulfilled, that might be an opportunity for people to set their start and quitting times, provided that they work those 8 hours per day that you're looking for. There are definitely some advantages to flex time. So I'll just go through these quickly. Of course, this can definitely reduce some of those traditional reasons for tardiness or absenteeism. So instead of forcing everyone to come in for 8 a.m., for instance, if I'm setting my own hours as working 10 to 6, I'm obviously going to take into consideration that it's easier for me to get to work for 10 a.m., for instance. So that's going to hopefully eliminate some of those traditional reasons why people are late or away from work. Obviously, people get more job satisfaction because they can adjust their work according to their own lifestyle. They can schedule their working hour for the times of the day when they are most productive. So if I'm a morning person, I may choose to work the 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. shift, for instance. Whereas if I'm an afternoon person, maybe I want to work the noon to 8 p.m. shift. This helps all of us overall in terms of traffic congestion in our area because people are coming and going at different times. It can definitely help with a recruiting perspective because it helps attract people to my organization because a lot of people like the idea of working flex time hours. And certainly, if I can extend my overall hours by providing flex time, this is going to actually help me improve my customer service by extending my operating hours of my business. There are, of course, some disadvantages to flex time, otherwise everyone would do it. Right? Not all jobs, unfortunately, lend themselves to flex time. Some jobs require people to be there at certain specific times of the day. Can you think of a job, for instance, where we wouldn't be able to have flex time? I can probably think of a few. They can also create some problems for managers because if I've got people working a variety of different hours a day, managers aren't going to want to work 12 hours a day. So there can create some issues with communicating, with directing my employees if they're all working different times. It can also force managers to extend their work week if they've got to work directly with their employees. So like I said, if my business is open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and I have people working a variety of hours in there, if I've got to directly manage their work, I as a manager may end up having to work extremely long days to be able to supervise everyone. There are a few other flexible types of work schedules I want to explore. One of them is called job sharing, and this is where two part-time employees perform a job that would typically be held by a full-time employee. I know I've seen this in my experience before when, for instance, I have two people coming back from a maternity leave position and neither one of them wants to continue working full time. We would actually split the job up and have each of them working part of the job. Now, with job sharing, a few ground rules are critical. One is communication. If I'm splitting a job up between two part-time people, typically I have to make sure that they communicate very well with each other. Otherwise, things can fall through the cracks very quickly. And the other thing to note here is I'm not saving any money in terms of job sharing. I'm just really splitting the job up. So there's no cost savings from an employer perspective here. One other thing that we see a lot of today, I'm doing it right now, is telecommuting. So this is using personal computers, networks, and other communication technology to work from home, to do things that are traditionally done in the workplace where we're now working from a home office. Of course, there are huge advantages to telecommuting, right? The big one is it can provide better work-life balance for employees. The ability to log in and work from home when I have free time, as opposed to having to work set 9 to 5 hours. It definitely has been shown to reduce absenteeism. People will work from home even if they're feeling a little bit under the weather. They don't have to necessarily get up and drive into work, so they tend to log in and do the work. The other thing is it's very attractive and helps keep people in an organization. So if things like commuting are a barrier for people, the ability to work from home might keep people within your company who might otherwise quit because they don't want to commute an hour, for instance, into Toronto to work every day. It helps all of us in terms of reducing the carbon footprint. We're not using transportation to and from the office every day. The other thing is that studies have shown that it actually increases productivity. People work much longer hours when they're telecommuting, believe it or not. So although maybe the old-fashioned sort of thinking about this was people working from home are busy folding laundry or sitting watching Ellen on TV, actually isn't true. We actually find that people tend to work much longer. So instead of working an 8-hour day, they tend to work a 10-hour day because they're actually more productive in the time that they're home and they tend to increase the number of hours. The other thing is, of course, it really helps us from a business perspective in that we have lower overhead. We don't have to provide office space for everybody anymore because many people are working from home. So there's lots of advantages to telecommuting, both from a business perspective and from a human perspective. So there are some disadvantages, I say, but I'm in for telecommuting, right? And I think that millennials are really changing the way we work remotely. This is from a source, LinkedIn, that you may be familiar with, where we talk about that improving technology and changing expectations of work and family for millennials are giving rise to a new office arrangement. This is that co-living, co-working space, often on the beach, but always somewhere far away. It's like WeWork meets an upgraded hostel in paradise with free coffee, fast internet, a kitchen and quiet space, along with the serendipitous meetings and experiences that make travel great. Leading the charge are companies like Selena, Outsite, and Roam, which are opening locations across the globe to meet the demands of today's digital nomads. So millennials are definitely changing the way we do work. I know if I stop into my local Starbucks, I see lots of people working in Starbucks now. So although there might be some disadvantages to telecommuting, I think it's definitely the wave of the future. So what do you think some of the disadvantages are? There are a few problems that come along with it. The first thing is there can be this loss of synergy. We're going to talk in a few minutes about team synergy, but really it's this ability for that working together and part of a group. That definitely gets lost as we become isolated in our own home offices or working from Starbucks. It can be difficult to develop performance standards and evaluation systems of people. So it may be hard for me as a manager to really understand how hard people are working and to really see how do I develop performance metrics around the way people are working. The other thing is there's definitely a need to develop technology strategies for equipment and making sure that people are supported when they're working remotely. There is definitely some managers still who may be uncomfortable with supervising telecommuters and people working from home. They're not sure how to do that, so that can be a training issue. And also, often telecommuters or people working from home, if you do it for long periods of time, you might start to feel disconnected from your organization. You start to feel somewhat isolated. And so, from a mental health perspective, it can be actually hard on people to feel disconnected from what's going on. Remember that we are social beings. We tend to seek each other out. When you're kind of disconnected for long periods of time, you might not understand your importance to the whole of the organization, and you may feel somewhat disconnected. So beyond behavioral concerns that we've been talking about, your book talks about ergonomic considerations, and you may have heard about ergonomics before. This is an element of job design that we tend to look at, and this is designing equipment and systems that can be easily and efficiently used by human beings. Why is this important to job design? Well, we know that, for instance, if we're sitting in an uncomfortable chair for long periods of time, that's going to make us not feel happy about our jobs and also not feel as productive. So although that's a simple example, part of job design is taking a look at those ergonomic considerations and making sure that we have looked at things to make people more productive and happier. And last but not least is designing work for groups and teams. This is an element of job design because we know that improving groups and teams and having good teamwork and group work definitely enhances collaboration, satisfaction, increases synergy, and makes people more productive. Teams. So why do organizations use teams and groups? Well, think for a second, have you ever been part of a team or group? When they work well, they're amazing. So we use them basically because we are social beings. So they help us gather together. They satisfy this intrinsic need to belong to things. So that's the first thing. The second thing is they definitely increase productivities. You've, I'm sure, heard the phrase that many heads are better than one, or many minds, great minds are better than one mind. So they do help us increase productivity. They help us increase employee collaboration. We can develop something called synergy that we're going to take a look at in a second. And they strengthen the employee commitment to the organization and to the organizational goals. We also use teams because most of the time, the whole is more than the sum of the parts. Two of the most common types of collaboration that we're going to explore are employee involvement groups and employee teams. So employee involvement groups, or EIs, are groups of employees, and we're typically talking about 5 to 10 staff who do related work, who meet and resolve problems or offer suggestions for organizational improvement. We also sometimes call these quality circles. These involve staff in the larger goals of the organization by using their suggestions for cutting costs or improving processes and products. A diagram that just talks about this process where groups brainstorm ideas, they prepare recommendations, managers evaluate the ideas, sometimes those recommendations are implemented, and the group members are rewarded for this. So you'll notice this sounds very task focused, and it is. This is pulling people together basically to brainstorm ideas and put together recommendations. Successful EI groups require a few things for them to be successful. The first thing is some comprehensive training for the group members so they all understand the rules. Why are they being put together? And for instance, even the rules around brainstorming, that there are no bad ideas, that there's recognition of the group's contribution, that there's continued input and encouragement by management for them to be able to gather and put together their ideas. And there's what we call use of participative or democratic leadership style. So we don't want one person managing this group. We want everyone to be participating equally in it. The second thing is employee teams. These are definitely part of our current business landscape today. And these are an outgrowth of employee involvement and empowerment that we talked about earlier. Work functions today are very often structured for groups and teams rather than just for individuals. So jobs are often structured to be completed by larger teams of people. What is a team? Well, if you've ever been part of one, it's a group of individuals who are working towards a common purpose. Members have complementary skills, so not all the same skills in a team, but their skills should complement each other. Their work is somewhat mutually dependent on each other, so you need every member of the team. An effective team, the members have discretion over the work that they perform. For example, they have their own individual work assignments, their own process improvements, and they know how to perform those jobs well. And the idea is that the workers and not the managers are the key to improving workplace performance. So what is synergy? I've danced around synergy a few times already. So what do I mean when we say that teams provide synergy? It's the interaction of the team members, the knowledge, skills, and abilities to produce results which are greater than the sum of their individual effort. And what team behaviors produce synergy? Well, first of all, support. All team members need to feel that they are included and that they contribute. Listening and clarification means that team members are able to discuss ideas, seek clarification, and then they can summarize those discussions. The third thing is disagreement. This should be seen as a natural part of team behavior. And when there is disagreement, comments should focus on issues rather than being on personal. The fourth thing is consensus. This can be challenging, but decisions need to be reached by consensus, which means everyone agrees on the decision. The last two are acceptance. Everyone has to feel valued, and the last is quality in that each team member is striving for excellence. So these 6 things produce synergy within a team. I'm not going to go through the forms of employee teams, although you'll notice from your textbook that your textbook goes through a number of different teams, things like cross-functional, project, self-directed, task force, and process improvement teams. The important thing to note here is that there are many different forms of employee teams today in the workplace. So in your experience, what makes a team successful? There are a number of specific characteristics of successful teams that we know through study of them in the workplace. A commitment to shared goals and objectives is key. We also need to have motivated and energetic team members who have open and honest communication with each other. Shared leadership is important, along with a clear role assignment so everyone knows what they need to do. A climate of cooperation, collaboration, trust, and holding each other accountable is critical. And last but never least is the recognition that conflict is positive, and through conflict we get to positive resolution. There are lots of benefits from an employment perspective to having teams in the workplace. First of all, we get an increased integration of individual skills. What do we mean by that? Well, we hire people that have a variety of different skills. And by putting people together who have different skills, we get a team that has this good integration of a lot of different skills on it. We get better performance, both quality and quantity solutions to unique and complex problems by having people that have these different skill sets. Studies show that we can reduce delivery time, reduce turnover and absenteeism, and we increase the amount of accomplishments among team members. So people are more satisfied, and therefore our customers are more satisfied, which is one of the big benefits for employee teams. So just as a wrap up for chapter 2, make sure you can answer the following questions. Hint, hint, wink, wink. Question number 1. Why is job analysis described as the cornerstone of HRM practices? Explain how job analysis helps with 3 other HRM areas. Question number 2. Describe 2 of the current approaches to job analysis. So know how data is collected, advantages and disadvantages of this method. Question number 3. Can you explain the difference between job analysis and job design? Question number 4. What are specific job traits and characteristics that motivate employees? Question number 5. What are some challenges with providing job descriptions from a company perspective? Question number 6. Advantages and disadvantages of telecommuting, job sharing, flex time, and a compressed work week. And question number 7. What are the characteristics of a successful team? To summary. So at the conclusion of this chapter, ensure that you are able to discuss the relationship between job requirements and HRM functions, indicate the methods by which job analysis typically is completed, identify and explain the various sections of job descriptions, provide examples illustrating the various factors that must be taken into account in designing a job, discuss the various job characteristics that motivate employees, describe the different group techniques used to maximize employee contributions, and differentiate and explain the different adjustments in work schedules.